The smell of wet rope and coal smoke thickened. Mulberry Street long before the foghorns mourned the harbor, and the gas lamps along the tenements hissed like snakes coiled in iron cages. Isabella II stepped from her carriage, the wheels slurring through a ribbon of mud, eyes catching on the bruised brick of a block that pretended to be a neighborhood and was in truth a ledger of debts and fire traps. She carried no diadem, only a city map with hand-drawn arrows, her gloves damp with mist and resolve. "We will not trade lives for headlines," she told the guard at her side. And though it sounded like policy, it felt like prayer. A shout knifed the dawn. The Mulberry Public Baths, a squat rectangle of steam and shame, had its basement lights burning when they should not. The watchman's clock on the lobby wall showed no rounds for hours. Someone had stopped time. Someone had locked a door. Someone was about to burn a woman alive for the price of an insurance payout and call it bad luck after. If you think they wouldn't, you do not know this city. Inside, echo and tile conspired to throw their footsteps back at them. The bath smelled of carbolic and old sorrow. When the first padlock gave, with a crack that sounded like a note from a choir, Isabella flinched at the chorus of tin cans rattling below. The basement door was chained twice, a rusted bite over fresh links. "On my count," she ordered the guard, shoulder striking the wood, splinters lifting like ash. The door yawed open into a throat of heat and vaulting shadow, lined up as if for inspection. Kerosene cans, a pyramid of kindling sacks, rags flecked with paraffin. Behind them, a cage of iron framed a storeroom, and in it, a woman coughing, scraping her throat with her own breath. "Rosa," Isabella called, because she knew the name, the one who laundered linen for the women at the Henry Street settlement house. "Rosa Conti, I'm here." The woman's eyes were all pupils. She clutched her palm closed like she was holding a pulse. "The key," Rosa said with a cough-torn laugh. "They locked me in a room. You opened a city." Isabella seized her hand and found metal pressing her skin, a tiny red-brown key, teeth blunted by decades of neglect. Moment one, the basement and the key. A camera could drink the scene. The lantern's brass halo, the film of oil on the water pooling under the pipes, the trembling hand that would later hold a whole neighborhood to account. Upstairs, the watchman blustered about a mistake. A clerk waved papers with all the authority dirty ink could buy. An inspection certificate stamped with a seal too crisp, too new. What the ward bosses called a forged inspection, bought by brown envelope, and handed across the counter with a wink and a sneeze to make it look accidental. Isabella pried an envelope from a drawer with her nail. Banknotes fitted inside like well-trained soldiers. "Whose name is on the seal?" she asked. The clerk's eyes did a clumsy waltz. "No one's who matters, ma'am. Everyone matters," she said evenly, and signaled her guard to collect the receipts, the duplicate blueprints, the ledgers with 2 columns, one for the city, one for the arrangement. "These will go to the District Reform Board," she said. "And if there is a board, then there will be independent inspections. We will make the law fit the people, not the other way around." That afternoon, the city swarmed like a hot hive. The Lower East Side clattered, rag peddlers, pushcarts, children like sparrows. At Henry Street, Lillian Wald met Isabella with a physician's cool fury and a stack of reports. "We can plot illness by staircase," Wald said. "The air inside these tenements has a temperature distinct from the rest of the city fever. Chimneys bricked shut, air shafts used as closets, rooms for 6, where 3 would sicken." Isabella trailed her fingers along a map bristling with pins. "Then we will build a remedy with pins and proof. Hydrant test records, standpipe pressure logs, photographs, names. Be careful with names," Wald warned gently. "The anonymous dossier has people in it. The tenement veil has more lives than we can count draped inside it." "It saved Rosa," Isabella said. It might kill its author if we are not careful, Wald said. Too level for it to be anything but true. That night, she found the photographer Jacob Riss on Park Row. Magnesium fumes curling from his hands like lightning had learned to whisper. He showed her plates, narrow rooms slumped under eaves, stairs with splintered jaws, a family nodding in an airless parlor around a blackened stove, hair matted by sleep and smoke. If they see what we see, Riss said, if they see it all at once, they will refuse to be innocent. Isabela studied a frame where a door had been nailed from the outside. They call a hallway a fire escape if they write it down. But if you light a match, the word turns to a coffin. It's a fire trap, Riss said plainly. Say it out loud. It is, she said. And it made the air colder, even as the press roared below the windows, spitting ink like a creature coughing up its guilt. A telegram slid under the door, anonymous as winter. If you would live, do not ask who I am. Tend to hydrant tests at Orchard and Hester. Watch the watchman's clock. TV. The initials were a veil-turned signature. She tucked the paper into her coat with a hand that shook despite herself. We think we are ready for the messenger. We are not ready for the cost. Evan Carter stood where a decent man can still be misread, as a shadow moving clear across a dangerous street. He was an engineer with a draftsman's economy of words, an inspector whose only ornament was the clarity of his notes. He met Isabela under a gas lamp, whose flame shivered like a guilty soul. City Hall orders, he said, holding a coil of rope and a set of wrenches. A hydrant test. Useless at this hour. Necessary. She regarded him with the kind of attention that makes a man remember his posture and forget his careful lies. Why at this hour? She asked. Because the men who rent your city to itself have supper then, he said. Because daylight sees only what they arrange for it to see. He could not know that she'd already read a telegram. He could not know she heard in his cadence the echo of the anonymous dossier's sentences, spare and damning. Moment 2. The rooftop and the lantern. They climbed a ladder to a flat roof, where water tanks hunched like patient beasts, where the city looked like a map folded into origami. A lantern swung from a pipe, their breath clouded and mingled, and neither of them mistook that for mere weather. We test the standpipe from the top, he said, and the first valve groaned awake, coughing up rust. The hydrant 2 blocks down stuttered when he opened the second. Pressure's wrong, he murmured. They throttled the main to save their own pipes. He passed her the spanner, their gloved hands knocking, the lantern's light cutting a coin from her cheekbone. Below, a siren wailed, a wrong sound at a wrong hour. They turned toward each other, a half-breath from a kiss that promised a life-sized for 2, and not a single life more. The alarm's second cry was farther off, a false alarm thrown like a stone to scatter them. The city, hearing them almost love each other, found a way to stop it. In the morning, Isabela convened a circle of people who could never quite be in the same room, and yet needed to be now. Wald with her numbers, Riss with his unflinching images, an officer from Theodore Roosevelt's reform-minded police, square-jawed, squinting at the future like it might confess if stared down hard enough. Roosevelt himself entered with the weather, all impatience and purpose. You bring the law, he said to Isabela without ceremony. I'll bring the muscle to make it look inevitable. We need a fire escape ordinance with teeth, she said, and a tenement safety act that spells out material, width, load, and egress. No velvet words. We also need to live between now and then, Roosevelt added, which is where my men come in. He nodded to the officer. They will cover the real inspections. But those ward bosses smell a reform the way rats smell a bakery. Let them starve, Isabela said, and no one laughed. They took to the streets with measuring tapes and copies of the anonymous dossier, the tenement veil, as if the city were a patient whose fever would break if only touched in the right places. At Orchard Street, They timed the watchman's clock rounds and found a sequence that betrayed a nap where there should have been vigilance. At Hester, they linked a hydrant test failure to a building with a history of accidents that had cost its investors nothing and its tenants too much. Twice they intercepted a brown envelope and photographed it in Riss's slow lightning. Crisp bills slipped into soft hands, signatures promised in exchange for charring lungs. Each time Evan hung back, careful as a man who knows a mistake would not cost him only his post. It would cost other people their names. They found Rosa again at Henry Street. Clean dress, wrists bruised like she had been wearing handcuffs made of hours. "I did laundry for a wife whose husband wears gold where flowers should be," she told Isabela. "He knows which doors are worth locking. He knows which families have no men old enough to break them." She held up the small key. "I kept this in my palm because sometimes a thing is safer when it hurts." Isabela nodded at the bleak wisdom of that. "Would you speak to a council?" "I will speak to anyone who has ears," Rosa said. "I will scream if I must." "No need," Isabela said, voice low. "We will build a room where a scream becomes testimony." Rumors walked faster than any of them. The ward bosses sent men with soft hats and hard knuckles to the baths, to Park Row, to the edges of the settlement house, offering apologies wrapped around threats, gifts wrapped around knives. A clerk who had handed her the forge inspection made an accidental confession. "They will burn a building tonight," he stammered, "to show you that the city is theirs." "Which building?" "That is never written down," he said, and handed her an address anyway, as if the fear had a map of its own. She passed it to Roosevelt's men, who settled themselves like furniture just inside the dark. Night breathed. They waited. The match never struck. Perhaps it was the sight of armed watch on every floor. Perhaps it was a rumor of a rumor. Perhaps it was the quiet knowledge slowly growing among the guilty, that the days of secrecy would end, and the reckoning would be arithmetic. Still, in the alley behind the tenement, Isabela saw someone watching, a man with shoulders that carried decisions, the tilt of his head both clinical and kind. "Evan," he said only, "if they see us they'll see them, and they'll kill them." She understood him as clearly as if he had confessed the authorship of the tenement veil in a signed letter. She wanted to say his name, and found it would burn her tongue if she did. "Walk," she told him quietly, their steps keeping time with the drip of water from the roofs. "There is a council tomorrow. They will ask for proof that doesn't bleed. We must give them that and nothing else. They will ask for the author," he said. "Then you must let them believe he does not exist," she said, somehow smiling as she said something so cruel to herself. It made her vision sharpen. "No man," he said softly, "is happier to be a rumor." The council chambers breathed old wood and older patience. Moment 3 surged in on the room's murmur. A tower of fabric samples singed at the edges, a demonstration standpipe in miniature, its copper veins shining like a red-brown anatomy lesson. Riss's images hit the walls like truth written in lightning. "Fire trap," said Isabela frankly. "Say it with me, fire trap." Wald unfolded a chart, numbers marching with the logic of winter. How many died of smoke that never became flame? How many coughed until their lungs gave? How many children slept beside locked exits? "They were not poor," Isabela said. "They were priced." When the room grew restless, Roosevelt's men leaned against the pillars like consequence had shoulders. A councilman, glutted with his own caution, said, "We cannot legislate against bad luck. We can legislate against padlocked doors," Isabela answered. "We can require standpipes with proper pressure, set hydrant tests at honest hours, punish forged inspections with prison time. We can write the width of a stair into law." Her voice was measured, cool, the tone she used when she remembered the key's bite into her palm. "Then the ambush with the gentleman's gloves,"
A lawyer in a fine suit rose to his full height and smiled like a sermon. "Forgive me," he said, "but an anonymous dossier. This tenement veil. Perhaps we should not base the city's future on a pamphlet written by a lover." The room inhaled as one organism. It was a cheap shot and also a perfect one. "Who is the author?" the lawyer asked, as if the fact had already been minted. "If your case stands on truth, reveal it. Otherwise, it stands on romance. There is a moment in any battle when the blade enters, and the question is whether to push or withdraw." Isabela set her hands on the table and felt the room's attention like a tide on her wrists. She could tell the truth and burn a network of informants to ash. She could lie and lose the law. Or she could do something uglier. She could break his words with her own and break herself with them. "The author," she said, crisp as ice, "is irrelevant, and judging by the errors that crept into his later pages, careless." She felt the sentence land in her own chest like a blow. "We are not here to debate a signature. We are here to decide whether to continue buying catastrophe by the block. These hydrant test logs," she raised a sheaf, "are city records. These standpipe pressure notes were taken last night by your own men." She gestured to Roosevelt's officer. "This watchman's clock," she continued, lifting the battered brass face, "marks a round that never happened. Time is the author. We are only its readers." The whisper moving across the chamber changed shape, lost its appetite. She had given the room a villain they could throw out, the pamphleteer, the meddler, the lover, and offered them, instead, the cold comfort of evidence. In the balcony, a man she did not dare to look at chose to become smaller than his boots. The law moved forward by inches. They called for a recess that felt like a century. In the corridor, Rosa stood with a shawl drawn tight, rings of steam on the windows making halos out of nothing. "You said he was careless," Rosa said, not unkindly. "I said what I had to say." "You will have to say goodbye too," Rosa said, eyes full of a practical sorrow. "After we pass it, if we pass it." "We will," Rosa said, and held her hand out. In Isabela's palm she placed the key again. "Keep it. For when they say doors are not locked." A second session, a second storm of words. This time, Riz's plates tucked under each councilman's glass of water, impossible to ignore, when passion ran dry. Wald spoke of contagion as a civic failing, not a private one. Roosevelt promised enforcement so swift it would seem like a gust of moral weather. An amendment flowed into the bill, then another. The fire escape ordinance was no longer an aspiration, but an index. The Tenement Safety Act, no longer a dream, but a document. A final voice, small, yet crafted like a scalpel, rose from the back. "Rosa, I laundered your collars," she told the room, which had finally turned around to face its own neck. "I watched soot accumulate in the folds of your good shirts. Soot is ash that did not get its full way. Do you want me to wash your city the way I wash your cuffs? Then give me water with pressure, stairs that fit a child, and a grandmother side by side. Doors that open from the inside, without any key at all." It wasn't eloquent. It was better than eloquent. It was enough. When the vote was called, the nays came fierce, and then faltered. The yeas grew like a song sung from the middle of the choir, where no one's voice is singular, and yet the sound is new. The Tenement Safety Act passed. The fire escape ordinance found its teeth. The city, groaning like something outgrowing its skin, shifted. Men in soft hats left by side doors to write another plan in other rooms. On Park Row, the presses shook like locomotives. On Henry Street, Wald's staff drew up lists of buildings whose seams would be examined until they squealed. At the precinct, Roosevelt's men wrote their names on a sheet that would become a roster of courage disguised as habit. And into this right clamor fell a silence, sturdy enough to stand on. The silence of two people on a staircase after the rain. Moment 4. unexpected, and soft as grief. The farewell on the steps. The granite was damp enough to hold the memory of the day's weather. The street lamps made coins of the puddle, and the city hall columns rose like a choir that already knew the hymn. Evan stood 3 steps below her, hat in his hands, the posture of a man about to say something tender and decide not to. "If they see us, they'll see them," he said, repeating the sentence as if it were a blessing that refused to rhyme. "And they'll kill them." "Va," she said, not the word of an aristocrat, not even a command, just a breath with purpose inside it. "Go, the city needs to live." He searched her face as if there might be a loophole in it. "I heard you," he said finally. "In there." He flicked his eyes toward the council chamber, where she had called him careless. "You needed a villain." "I needed the law," she answered. "And I needed you to survive the law." The rain picked that moment to return, stippling his coat, beating her lashes. He lifted one knuckle and touched the air an inch from her cheekbone, as if his skin belonged to the distance now. "If we ever find a city where laws are built without blood," he said, "meet me on its bridge." "I will," she lied, with such grace, the lie became a kind of art. He put his hat back on and became a small thing marching toward a dark carriage. The watchman's clock in the corridor ticked a lonely confession. This round would not be recorded. In the weeks that followed, the law learned to walk. Inspectors with printed authority knocked and measured, not for theater, but for width, load, and clearance. Tenements with stairs like grudges were ordered to rebuild. Standpipes were fitted and tested. Hydrant tests scheduled at hours that could not be gamed by men who dined late and lied early. Forged inspections earned indictments that did not evaporate. A handful of slumlords, no longer shielded by their ward bosses, stood in court looking like men who had mistaken the moon for a coin. The District Reform Board posted lists in English and Italian and Yiddish. Independent inspections became as ordinary as sunrise. It was not a miracle. It was a calendar of follow-through. Rosa ran brigades that moved like water, their training as plain as kindness. They checked the new hinges, the new latches, the angles of the iron fire escapes, insisting that dignity had a geometry. She fixed her voice to a pitch that carried up whole shafts of stair. "When you smell paraffin, you do not wait to pray. You open a window, you lift a child, you count heads with your hand." And one evening, under the fresh scaffolding of a renovated building on Orchard, Rosa grasped Isabela's hand and pressed the old key back into it a final time. "You keep this," she said, closing Isabela's fingers around the metal, now rubbed clean by use and carried in a pocket among receipts for rope and rivets. "When somebody says the door was always open, show them this." Isabela felt the iron's cool weight, as if it still held a room together. Newspapers ran photographs that startled people into thinking where they had only been seen. Riz framed a shot of a family on a newly required fire escape, not as relics, but as citizens laying claim to a safe night. Wald's charts turned from scolds into ledgers of progress, tiny lines of ink that wrote relief. Roosevelt's men grew bored, which in a city is often the surest sign of success. There were scoffs, of course there were. Men who missed the old way missed it loudly. Faded ribbon was tied to old levers. The machine grieved, but it did not rise again as it had been. And still, the law demanded payment in another currency. Mall gossip placed Isabela on the arms of princes and magnates, a comic strip of suitors, none of whom understood that she had already slipped the ring over a city's finger. One afternoon, a brown envelope slid under her office door, a color all wrong for money now, made honorable by anxiety. Inside, a single page torn from a draft of the tenement veil, the margins crowded with a draftsman's notes, a neat hand admitting small faults so as not to be undone by large ones. At the bottom, scarcely more than a scar in pencil. "For I too, not for love, for lives." She folded the paper precisely, put it into a safe that held the city's maps, and understood that anonymity had a penmanship after all. The unexpected twist hit with the quiet elegance of a choice made twice: to defend the informants and to defend the law. Isabela visited Park Row during the late edition and gave an interview that would cut more cleanly than any denial. The tenement veil contained errors, she said calmly. No one should be canonized for a pamphlet. Canonize the pressure gauge. Canonize the key that opens from the inside. Canonize the mothers who carry their babies down honest stairs. The reporter blinked at a story that wouldn't sell like a romance. In a shadowed doorway, a man who could have been any decent man stepped back and swallowed his name like a pill he would take every morning for the rest of his life. He would live, so would the people who had trusted him with their corners of the truth. If it wounded him to watch the woman he loved choose a city over him, there was a balm that the honorable sometimes receive without asking, the knowledge that they were never really hers to lose, because they had been given to the work first, and the work kept giving back. We look for dramatic endings because we have been taught to fear the slow inches of good. But watch this instead: a hydrant test on a bright morning, water lofting into the air like a creature delighted with muscle, a standpipe gleaming, its valve marked by scuffs from wrenches and pride, a child's hand testing a door from the inside, and finding it opening, because the law has decided to be the city's habit instead of its emergency. Somewhere under the elevated line, a fiddler played a tune that might have been a hymn in another building, another time. Somewhere on a roof, a lantern's flame waved its small banner of surrender and then steadied. When people asked about the Tenement Safety Act in later years, they told it wrong in the way most victories are told wrong. They wanted an arsonist caught red-handed, a villain unmasked, a proposal in the rain. What they had was better: a key, a law, photographs you could not look away from, nurses with clipboards, officers bored with doing the right thing, a city learning to breathe through doors that finally opened, and two souls who built a bridge they would never cross together, a bridge other people would cross every hour and call it home. On certain nights, when the wind sneaks downtown and the lamps flicker like old friends remembering themselves, you might catch the shape of a hat moving away from the steps of City Hall, or you might hear a woman's voice behind glass saying just once more, "We will not trade lives for headlines." It is not a promise, it is a clock. You can count on it.